Now, after a week of violence across the UK, some of those who took part in the unrest have started to appear in court. Those charged include a boy of 14 and a pensioner aged 69. Some could face years in prison. John Honey, seen here in the St George's Cross T-shirt, appeared before magistrates charged with violent disorder after being recorded in a stream of online videos in Hull on Saturday. In Southport, convicted terrorist neo-Nazi Matthew Hankinson used the mayhem to promote a race war on social media. Far-right convicted criminal Stephen Yaxley Lennon, also known as Tommy Robinson, spent the weekend inciting his thousands of followers from a sun lounger in Cyprus. He was handed back his X account by the firm's owner, Elon Musk, who posted saying the UK was headed for civil war. X hasn't replied to the BBC's request for comment. Ben.
Let's talk now to the Justice Minister, Heidi Alexander, who's in Westminster for us. Heidi Alexander, good morning to you. First of all, your reaction after another night of unrest. Plymouth, Birmingham, Belfast all hit with disruption last night. What's happening?
Well, look, the criminal violence that is happening on our streets in our communities across the country is absolutely appalling. The government is gripping this crisis and has done since the word go. Obviously, we saw last night in Plymouth a robust police response. I'd like to thank the police officers who are on the front line, really, in all of this. Many of them have been injured. Obviously, what the government is doing is making sure that all elements of the criminal justice system, whether that's the Crown Prosecution Service, the courts, the prison service, stand ready to ensure that swift justice can be delivered and that the people that are causing this mayhem on our streets face the full force of the law and that there will be consequences for their actions. Because let's be honest, when somebody picks up a brick and decides to throw it at a police officer, or when they decide to set a building on fire, they are choosing to commit a criminal offence. And so we will make sure that the full force of the law is visited upon them.
There are two very distinct elements to this, aren't there, when it comes to justice? One, of course, is catching and sentencing the perpetrators, those throwing bricks or firebombs or attacking police officers. But there's also a very different element of inciting that sort of behaviour online. We touched on some of it there. Does the government, does the country have enough powers to clamp down on that sort of rhetoric and that sort of language online that is inciting this behaviour?
A crime is a crime, whether that is done online or whether it's done by people on our streets. And the Prime Minister has been clear that if you are participating or inciting this violence, whether that's in reality or online, you can face criminal sanction and you will face criminal sanction as a result of that. And so, we've been working with the social media companies and some of the action that they have taken already with the automatic removal of some false information is to be welcomed. But there is undoubtedly more that the social media companies could and should be doing. There is misleading information being propagated and disseminated online, and frankly there is inflammatory material that is being hosted on these platforms. Now, whilst not all of the provisions of the Online Safety Act have come into force yet, social media companies shouldn't be waiting for that. They should be living up to their moral responsibility because, look, anyone who has a platform has a responsibility to be calling for calm, in my opinion. We've had police officers injured on our streets. As we talked about earlier, buildings being set alight, there's been looting of shops, there's been racist attacks, there's been, dangerous extremism. And so whether that's happening on our streets or online, then the full force of the law will come down upon you. And I think we need to be clear about this. Just because you're sat behind a computer screen or the screen of your mobile phone, that will not protect you from the law.
Does that also apply to Elon Musk, the owner of Twitter, who said the UK was heading for a civil war?
So I think Elon Musk's comments are totally unjustifiable. I think at the moment, as I have said, everyone should be calling for calm. He does have a responsibility given this huge platform that he has. And so, to be honest, I think his comments are pretty deplorable.
And what response would the government have when it comes to that? If the man who owns this platform on which so much of this misinformation is being spread, some of this incitement to violence is being spread, if he suggests the UK is heading towards civil war, what can the government do about that?
Well, look, we're going to be having to review the wider legislative framework around the Online Safety Act. I know that the Science and Technology Secretary of State, Peter Kyle, is in discussions, and his officials and my officials will be in discussions with social media platforms. I'm not pretending this is easy. Technology evolves almost by the day, doesn't it? And so we will have to make sure that our wider legislative framework
This isn't a new problem, though, is it?
It's a problem that has become significantly worse, I think, in the last few years. The speed with which misinformation and disinformation can be propagated through social media has caused a lot more problems in recent years. And so whilst there has been some legislation brought in by the previous government, I think the problem does warrant us constantly reviewing the legislation and asking ourselves what more we can do from government. But also I think there's a moral responsibility there for the social media companies themselves.
A lot of similarities have been drawn to those riots in 2011, but it feels very different when it looks how we look at the response. Fewer courtrooms, fewer judges, fewer court staff. How are the courts and the prisons going to cope with this? I know this morning announcing 500 extra prison places, but do we have the capacity to deal with this problem?
Yeah, so we have made available an additional 567 prison places that were due to open later this month, but we've been able to bring those forward. And so there will be a new house block at Stocken Prison in Rutland. We have repurposed some space in a young offenders institute called Cookham Wood in Kent. And so we will ensure that anyone who is given a custodial sentence, there is a prison place waiting for them there. With regard to the courts, what happened in 2011 was that the magistrates' courts had extended hours. Some of them sat longer, they sat into the evenings, they sat through weekends. And after the 2011 riots happened, the judiciary set up something called the Additional Courts Protocol, which can be invoked when in a particular region, if there's particular pressure, the chief police officer and the chief prosecutor in that region can then go to the judiciary and ask them to consider those extended sittings. Now, yesterday, the judiciary indicated that they would be willing to consider those requests. That protocol hasn't been invoked at the moment, but, you know, everything that I've heard from the judiciary suggests to me that we are on the same page when it comes to the need for swift and effective justice to be delivered, because this disgusting behaviour that is happening on our streets cannot be allowed to go on.
One of the concerns too is this apparent so-called two-tier policing. We know yesterday Met Commissioner Mark Rowley was asked by a journalist about that very issue. He grabbed the microphone and threw it to the ground. Do you acknowledge, and what do you understand this issue to be, when people talk about the perception of two-tier policing, that this is not, the policing is not applied fairly across everybody who is on the streets? How do you tackle that? And do they have a point?
So I don't accept the idea that there is a two-tier policing system in this country. I think it's a completely baseless assertion, and I'm not going to entertain it. The police in this country exercise their powers without fear or favour, and I think this accusation does a huge disservice to the thousands of policemen and women who go out to do their jobs every day to uphold the rule of law, and who go into work in order to treat everyone fairly.
And you say all protests that are on the streets of this country are policed in the same way?
So, yes, fundamentally, the police will take operational decisions about how to police protests effectively. What I do take issue with, though, is the idea that what we're seeing on our streets at the moment is a protest. It is not. It is outright sheer criminality and violence, and that is why the individuals who are responsible for it need to face the full force of the law and face consequences for the actions that they are choosing to take.
Heidi Alexander, good to have you with us this morning. Thank you,
Thanks
Justice Minister Heidi Alexander. Thank you.